Okay, so good evening from Ohr Somayach in the middle of a blackout. They say this the 3 weeks is a period of darkness, and we're sitting here in the dark except for the emergency lighting. But in Kol Zeh, we want to learn some Torah tonight and bring some light to the 3 weeks. The Satmar Rav, Zeichet Tzad Livrocha, Rav Yolish Teitelbaum, was known as a fierce kanoi, champion, a defendant of Jewish values, and he had opinions which not everybody agreed with, and he clung to them with fierceness, and he wouldn't move on them. And what's less well known about him, is that he had a heart of gold. He was very fearsome in some ways, but he was what they call a soft touch. The story goes that one day there was this con man, a guy called Yossel, who weaseled his way in to see the Satmar Rav, and he poured out this tale of woe. He was telling the Satmar Rav how his wife was in and out of mental institutions, and his son was about to be evicted because he couldn't pay the rent, and his daughter was 29 and she couldn't find a shidduch. One sorrow after another, one problem after another, until the Satmar Rav was sitting there with tears in his eyes, and he dug into his pockets, pulled out all the money he had in the pockets. He opened up the desk in front of him, and took all the money he had out of the desk in front of him. He gave it to the man. He said, Go and pay your wife's hospital bills, and I'll daven you for your daughter. She should find a shidduch, and find a nice flat for your son. He should have a proper apartment. Go, take the money, go. And he's going out, and as he's going out, the Rebbetzin comes in, and she sees this guy leaving, and she says to her husband, she said, what was he doing here? She said, my dear wife, you have never heard such a tale of woe as I heard from this poor man. His daughter can't get a shidduch. His son is about to be evicted. She said, his son? He's not even married. Everything he said wasn't true. Nothing he said was true. And the Satmar Rav went, nothing was true? Baruch Hashem. Now, we laugh, but I'm not sure that we should laugh, because essentially, that's really what Ahavat Yisrael is. Most of our reactions would be, wow, I got conned. Somebody ripped me off. Satmar Rav, an Adam Gadol, he feels, wow, Baruch Hashem, that's not true. This poor man doesn't have all these problems. And if we laugh, we laugh at the gap between our own Ahavat Yisrael and what real Ahavat Yisrael is really about. It's a time now, the time of the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, as we know, was destroyed because of sinas chinam. The Chavitz means baseless hatred. The Chavitz Chaim says that sinas chinam really means, what it really meant was that it was lashon hara, all forms of negative speech. And the tikkun, for sure, the fixing of all of those mistakes that were made that caused the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash must be Ahavas Chinam. Ahavas Chinam doesn't mean free love. Free love is something which was a slogan in the 60s, which basically meant free indulgence. What it means is what the Satmar Rav said. Satmar Rav felt that I love you even if you do something wrong to me. It's very easy to love someone when they're just like you. Very easy. But can you respect someone? Can you love someone when they're completely different to you? Can you respect them when they're greater than you, when they're frummer than you, when they're less frum than you? Can you respect them when they're different to you in every way? Can you respect them when they take pride in doing things that you find absolutely and are absolutely disgusting? Can you still see the neshama inside? Can you still love them? That's Ahavas Chinam. Can you still cherish the soul, the pure neshama, the neshama which can never be touched by any outside tumah, that pintaliyid, that point of purity which is in the heart of every Jew? Can you still see that? Can you still love that? That's what Ahavas Chinam means. Every person is priceless. Every Jew is priceless. When you smile, Gemara says when you smile at somebody, you show them your teeth, it's like you feed them milk. A smile says, you matter. A hello says, I noticed you. I didn't cancel you. We're in the middle of this cancel culture where people just get edited out from people's reality. A nod says, you're in my world. I didn't remove you off my radar. I respect you because you have a neshama. And even when you make choices that I wouldn't make, and even when you're completely wrong, I see the neshama inside you. As we said, the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed by Lashon Hara b'sinas chinam, and the third Beis HaMikdash will be built by the mitzvahs, which are the opposite of that, which redress that shortcoming. The mitzvahs of the mouth, Torah, Tefillah, and positive speech, encouraging speech. Hakol Kol Yaakov, that's our trade, that's our umnus. The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the power of the voice of Jacob is immense, is enormous. That's the power that Hashem gave to us. The power of the voice, the power of thoughtfulness, and the destructiveness of inconsiderate thought, inconsiderate speech, inconsiderate action. My wife told me a story about a friend of hers who went to a wedding where she didn't know anyone. So she sat down at a table. Nobody at the table said a word to her. She felt embarrassed, so what would you do in such a situation? She took out her cell phone and pretended she was speaking to someone. Wow. Now there's just so long that you can talk on a cell phone when there's nobody on the other end of the line. And so after a few minutes she just left. She felt so bad, just left. And what about the inconsideracy of when you're talking to somebody and they tell you, and you tell him about the shidduch you just made for your daughter with the best bocher in Hebron or Ponovich, and maybe this person you're speaking to has a 29-year-old daughter sitting at home who's finding it very difficult to get married. And maybe before you tell him how your wife just made Sheva brachos for 80 people, maybe consider that his wife may actually be having trouble making even one bracha, Asher Kedishah Mitzvah Zavod Zivono, Lad Nikneh Shel Shabbos, because she can't get out of bed from depression. You don't know what's going on in people's lives. The Gemara says, as I said, when you smile at someone, when you give somebody an encouraging word, you give a life. You save a life. The tongue is a kli, the umnus of Yaakov, that can bring kedusha into the world, or, God forbid, the reverse. The right word at the right moment can give someone their life back. There's a story about someone who was a well-known searcher after early Jewish manuscripts. He published them. Many of the manuscripts that we have in classical Jewish law are, some of them until quite recently were difficult to read. They had a lot of mistakes in them, printing errors or copyist errors. And so this particular person made it his duty to go around the world trying to find the most original versions of the documents, and it happened that he found in the Cairo Geniza a manuscript of the Rambam. I think it was the Yad Chazakah. And he was so excited about this, and he went to the Egyptian government and asked them, he wanted to buy it from them. They said, no, sorry, this is Egyptian property, we are not selling it to anybody for any money whatsoever. So he was not a man to be easily deterred. He went to London, he lobbied support from the members of Parliament, the House of Commons, House of Lords, pulled all the strings he knew, got to meet all the people, used all the connections. He went to the States, to Washington, he rolled out this army of troops and a substantial sum of money, and eventually he got the Egyptians to sell him this manuscript. And they brought this manuscript back to Jerusalem, to his machon, his institute, where they would analyze and print these new versions, and they put it down on the table. And of course, the entire institute, the entire Machon gathered round to see this. You can imagine this moment. It's the first time that this parchment had been seen, been revealed to the eyes, Jewish eyes, in maybe 1,000 years almost, 1,000 years. And everybody leant over as they unfurled the parchment. And there was one young fellow there, one of the junior translators, and he leant forward to have a closer look. And he didn't realize, but just by his elbow was this very large styrofoam cup of very sweet, very hot, very milky coffee. And as he stretched over to look, just the very tip of his elbow grazed the styrofoam cup, but it was enough to send the whole thing all over the parchment. And within a few seconds, the whole thing was an unintelligible glob. You know, the room went. You can imagine when the silence in the room, like. Oh my God! And this fellow, the Askan who managed to get this manuscript, he went over and he put his arm around the fellow and he said, "Don't worry, we'll get you another cup of coffee." Wow. Up to that split second before, his job was to bring this manuscript to the eyes of the Jewish people. Now, what's the next? The job I have is to try in some way and save this person, to save his embarrassment, to give him comfort. My wife knows a Rebbetzin who always makes sure that she never finishes the conversation. She always tries to make sure that the other person says the last word. You always have the feeling that she has more time for you. If you notice that, it's always struck me that the bigger a person is, the more time that he seems to have for you. And even though you know he's got many, many people, but when you're with him, he makes you feel that's to be big, that you're all that's right now is important is you. Wow. Small people, if you notice, are the other way around. Small people never seem to have time. Oh yeah, let's do lunch. That's great. I have my people talk to your people. You don't have people, you should get people. They're very used to have people. Nobody has any time, right? They're on their phone, they're this, that, the other. I think we spoke about in previous weeks, the word Gadol comes from the root of Gad. In the Pasuk, Gad, Gadud, Yikudenu, Gad. The tribe of Gad is a marching troop. We spoke about this many times, I think. Gadlus, the idea of Gadlus is the ability to, what does it mean? What is a troop? What is a platoon? In modern Hebrew, Gadud is a platoon. That is that which moves forward, that which connects, that goes on. Gad, Gadud, Yikudenu. There are many examples of this in Hebrew, but that's just one example. Why? Because the idea of somebody who is a Gadol is the opposite of somebody who is a Katan. Katan is from the word katua, Aramaic. Same word in English, kat. A Katan is somebody whose every single second of their life is unconnected to what's before or what's after. A baby, a Katan. Baby's a Katan. Nothing more Katan than a baby. A baby will wake up an entire hemisphere if he's got a tickle in the back of his throat. You give him an ice lolly, you give him a popsicle, he's the happiest person in the world. Take it away, the world just came to an end. Nothing has any continuity. It's now this, now this, now this, now this, now. If you think about it, that's very much the world we live in terms of what the media tries to do to people. It tries to turn them into katanim, small. Now this, now this, now this. One of the miracles of working here, Baruch Hashem, in Ohr Somayach for 30 odd years, is that it's still a miracle to me that you can teach somebody who's been brought up on a diet of TikTok and Instagram, that you can still teach a Tosfos. This is not Pashut. This is as close to an open miracle as you're about to see nowadays. Yeah. Gad, Gadol, connection. The definition of a Gadol, and by this not many two people make it to become an adult in their lives, is to take each separate moment of your life and plug it in to what's next and what's before and what's coming after. It has a coherent, cohesive direction. Nothing, most of us, like this, we're distracted, right? Weapons of mass distraction, as I call the iPhone. Distraction. This, that. If you notice an Adam Gadol, a great man, one of the things that I think I can testify about that they have, and of course in many ways they're very different, but one thing they all have is that nothing goes, everything is plugged in, everything is focused, everything is cogent, cohesive. It's all going in the same direction. So, there's this Rebbetzin, and she will not let you put the phone down first. She always has a seemingly inexhaustible supply of partings. Be gesund, bracha v'atzlacha, asach nachas, be gebenched, tie bari. She is never the one to put the phone down first. Kavod. Giving place to people, giving importance to people. It says, I forgot the pasuk. Kavod v'lo yidom. What is it we say it every morning? Where is it? Let me have a siddur, please. I've got it, it's okay. Leman yizmercha kavod v'lo yidom. Leman yizmercha kavod, in order that kavod should sing to you. But actually the word kavod means what? The nefesh. The nefesh is called the kavod. What's the connection between kavod and nefesh? If you notice, people, when they lose all of their kavod, when they go crazy or they die, everybody needs a certain amount of self-respect. I'm not talking about arrogance. I'm not talking about conceit. A sense of their own self-worth. And if we could plug this back into the sin of the spies, it says, Rashi says, the Pasuk says they saw themselves as grasshoppers. Right? The people of the land saw us as grasshoppers, and so we saw ourselves in our own eyes. And that lack of self-respect, that lack of kavod, drives a person. It reminds me of a joke actually about a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist cartoon I saw once. There's a guy lying on the couch and the psychiatrist is talking to him, and he says, well, the trouble with you is you're paranoid. Ask anybody. So when a person, the greatest slavery that can exist is when a person relies on other people for his own sense of self-worth. But a person, if you deprive him, and that's what the Nazis, Yemach Shemam V'Zichram, tried to do. Not to just kill the Jewish people, to deprive us of our kavod. And what do when you strip away from somebody any sense of their own self-worth, their own self-respect? They either go crazy or they die. Because that is the nefesh. The man's kavod v'lo yidom. The nefesh is the kavod. And a person, if he's taken away all his kavod from him, he will go meshuggah. He'll go crazy. And what happens, interestingly enough, when a person goes meshuggah? He starts to hallucinate that he's somebody else. And who is he? He's not going to be the garbage collector. He's going to be Napoleon. He's going to be somebody, the most mechubadika person you can think of, the most exalted and important. Why? Because when a person loses that sense of his own kavod, he loses his nefesh. So then he'll go mad, and he'll replace that with the most exalted person, the most mechubadika person he could think of. This lady, this Rebbetzin, always goes out of her way to be mechabed. Words of encouragement are so precious. Loshen tov, as opposed to loshen hara. Words of encouragement. I had the schus to be in the shiur here of Rav Dov Schwarzman, Zeichet Tzaddik Livrocha. Now, to give you an idea of who Rav Dov Schwarzman was, Rav Aaron Kotler, Zeichet Tzaddik Livrocha, who was the head of all of Torah Jewry in America at the time. We're going back, I guess, 50 years. He chose, of all of the Bochrim in Eretz Yisrael in America, Reb Dov to be his son-in-law. He said he knows Bava Kama better than I do. Wow. And he was an absolute Ilui, and also an extremely warm and sympathetic person. And there are many stories about him. He would learn sometimes for 70 hours at a stretch. He was outstanding. Rav Moshe Shapiro, Zeichet Tzaddik Livrocha, who was maspid him, who spoke an eulogy at his levaya, and was close with Rav Dov, said there was never anybody who was like Reb Dov, and there never ever will be again, which is quite a statement. I had the schus. He was the rabbi's rabbi, the Rosh Hashiva's Rosh Hashiva here in Ohr Somayach. He gave the top shiur. Now, for a couple of years, I'd been in Reb Naftali Kaplan's shiur, and Reb Naftali is a brilliant mahanech, brilliant Gemara teacher. He taught me to learn. And but after 3 years in his shiur, he decided that it was time for me to move up. And I went into Reb Dov's shiur, and I didn't know what hit me, because Reb Dov was all over the place. Reb Naftali would take us step by step by step, and Reb Dov he used to compose the shiur in the time he used to walk in from the old base medrash to the conference room. He'd all had it. It was all there. I think I almost counted the words before I got lost in his shiur. So I was completely lost. And he came up, he called me over after the shiur one day, and he said, "Who's your chavrusa?" So I said, I don't have a chavrusa. He said, "You don't have a chavrusa? I will be your chavrusa." And he used to sit me down after the shiur every day and at this point he was already starting to become not so well. This is at the beginning of his sickness. And he used to sit me down for half an hour, 40 minutes every day, and painstakingly, and I'm sure for him painfully, go over just one point so that I would understand it. That kind of care, that kind of ichpatiut is what you see in an Adam Gadol. Our words have echoes, our actions have echoes, for the good. And there's a story about a young fellow, shortly before his marriage. He went to see an Adam Gadol, a great man, because he had something which was weighing very heavily on him. He said to this Adam Gadol, "I grew up in Yerushalayim when food was a luxury. We didn't even know what a banana looked like. We were so poor, we were so hungry. And one day when the Rebbe went out of the room, he left some change on the stender, and I just couldn't resist it. And I took the money and I put it in my pocket. And the Rebbe came back and he saw immediately the money was gone. So he made the whole class face the wall, and one by one he made us turn out our pockets. So what I did was I quickly took the money and I put it into the pocket of the guy standing next to me. So when it came to his turn and he emptied out his pockets, he couldn't believe it was there. He swore to the Rebbe that he didn't steal it, but of course he didn't believe it. And unfortunately he got a name after that as being a thief. And not long after that, he dropped out of the cheder and he became a chiloni. He went off the derech completely. And he said, how can I go to, it says Yom Chasuna, the day of the Chasna is like a day, Yom Kippur. How can I go through my Yom Kippur with that on my mind? I ruined that person. I ruined that boy's life. So this Adam Gadol says, that reminds me of a very similar incident that happened when I was in Cheder. The Rebbe also made us all stand in a line facing the wall, but when he found the culprit, he didn't let on who it was. He simply took the money, put it back in his pocket, and when he got into the end of the line, he said, Tov, let us all say together, Hashivenu Hashem Elokeinu v'nushuva, Chadesh Yomeinu kekedem. He said, you can't blame yourself. You were poor. You were hungry. You're not to blame for that other boy dropping out. And that fellow himself who went off the derech, who became Chiloni, Hashem will understand what he went through and he will judge him accordingly. The person I'm concerned is the Rebbe. Through a single moment of lack of judgment and sensitivity, he ruined that boy's life. We have to be so careful what we say. We have to be so careful. I remember a couple of years ago on a Shabbos afternoon, I was asked to speak to a group of young boys and girls. They call it a machne kedam tzva'i. It's a camp that they go to before they go into the army, and they try and expose them to different sections of Israeli public, because these boys and girls are going to be the cream, so to speak, of Israeli society. All very bright, all very pleasant, very nice. And part of their training is to come into contact with the Haredi society. So this particular Shabbat, they were being hosted in the area here in Ramat Eshkol by Haredi families. And I went to speak to them. And I told them about my background and how I was in the music business and that I was successful, and et cetera, et cetera. And after my presentation, one of the girls, she said to me, he said, yeah, but you're not really a typical Haredi. So I said, I'm sorry, I don't have my membership card with me right now, but I don't know what you mean by that. She said, no. At lunch, my hostess made me feel like a karkara reka, an empty wagon. Now that's an interesting expression. I don't know to this day whether Rishi realized, but the expression karkara reka was used in a conversation between David Ben-Gurion, the then Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and the Chazon Ish Zechzad Livrocha, when there was a debate as to the nature of how religious the state was going to be. I think there was a conversation about whether public transport was going to run on Shabbat. There was some kind of negotiation going on. And the Chazon Ish said to Ben-Gurion, he said, look, there's a halacha that says that when two wagons meet, it's actually the Gemara says, while on the ascent to Beit Choron, how should they act? If one is laden and the other is unladen, the latter, the unladen one, has to give way to the laden one. He said, we are laden with 3,000 years of history. You have to give way to us. And the expression that was used there was the karkara, an unladen wagon was a karkara reka. I never got to the bottom of this, but sometimes in our desire to do Kiruv, we can come off as condescending, that we have the answers to everything, the fount of all truth, and how lucky you are that you've found yourself at this wonderful Haredi Shabbos table where we will disabuse you of all your apikosis and your ignorance. It's very easy to be supercilious. It's so important that you have to show people darkei or darkei noam. If the only way that you can ever influence people is if you have a real relationship with them. If you really value them. Because if you don't do that, then, if you treat the person you're trying to be makarev as an esrog, you're going to end up with a lemon. I guarantee you that. The only way Kiruv only works through love and respect. The power of the mouth. Our actions have echoes. By the way, I'm not sure I managed to reverse this young girl's impression of Haredim. I think she still thought that I was...
A different thing.
Yeah. I'll give you another example. I remember my son, when he first went to Cheder, he was, it's a big thing to get on that bus, that Cheder bus, when you're a young, little whippersnapper, And he told me that he was crying. And one of the bigger boys came up to him and said, don't cry, and he gave him a sweetie. So my son, from that, every time come Elul and all the new young boys would go on the bus, he always got onto the bus with a pocket full of sweeties to give to the youngsters. There's another story I heard about Reb Aaron Leib Steinman. The story goes like this. There was a young fellow from a religious family, grew up completely from in Bnei Brak, and one day he decided he wanted to be chilon, he wanted to be fry. He moved out of his parents' apartment in Bnei Brak, and he moved to Tel Aviv to his uncle, who was Chiloni, and he dropped everything. and he started to go out with girls, and he met this non-Jewish girl from Norway who happened to be in Tel Aviv, and he got engaged to her, and he said he's going to marry her. And now this was too much even for the secular uncle. And he said, look, you can't do this without at least going and telling your parents. So the only day that he agreed to go and tell his parents was on a Shabbos. And but he said, if I'm going to go there, it's going to be on my conditions, on what I say. And what were his conditions? Well, Friday night there in Bnei Brak, he saw he was outside there with a cigarette and his iPhone on the balcony for all to see. And Shabbos morning he was out there with the same iPhone and a different cigarette. And come Shalosh Shudas time, his father says to him, I'm going to a shiur of Rav Aaron Leib Steinman. Would you like to come along? So he said, okay. So he goes to the shiur. Rav Steinman gives him the shiur. And after the shiur, Shalosh Shudas, the father brings this young fellow over to Rav Aaron Leib, and he says, this is my son, and I'm sorry to say that he doesn't keep Shabbos anymore. And Rav Aaron Leib said, can I ask you a question? He said, how long have you not been keeping anything? And he said, 2 years. And he said, in those last 2 years, did you ever have hirhurei tshuva? Did you ever have thoughts of tshuva, of becoming religious again? He said, yeah, I suppose so. He said, how many times? He said, well, about 4 times. And how long was each time? He said, well, I don't know, about 10 minutes. So he says, it comes out, said Rabbi Aaron Leib to this fellow, so it comes out in the last 2 years, you had 40 minutes of b'mokum balei tshuva ein tzadikim gemurim omdim sham. In the place of penitence, in the place of balei tshuva, even tzadikim, complete tzaddikim cannot stand there. He said, for that, I envy you. Good Shabbos. He shook his hand and walked off. Anyway, the guy went back to the flat, the apartment. There was something about Rabbi Aaron Leib's, the way he'd spoken to him, that he couldn't get it out of his mind. He just started to... He went back to Tel Aviv, and he decided to postpone the wedding. And then he broke up with the girl, and slowly, he came back, he went back to Bnei Brak, and I believe today that he's learning in Koil. But if you think about it, this story doesn't make any sense at all. Why? Why would this totally Chiloni guy want to go and listen to a shmooze from Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman? And somebody asked him this question. And he said, when I was in Kita Daled, in Cheder, in Bnei Brak, the Rebbe took us all to meet Rabbi Aaron Leib. And the Rebbe had asked Rabbi Aaron Leib Dafka to give a test, a bechina. And the Rebbe asked Rabbi Aaron Leib to make sure the questions were really simple, because, Kita Daled. So Rabbi Aaron Leib asked each boy a question, and when he answered, he gave him a sweetie. And when it was my time, I went into him, and he asked me a question. It was a simple question. I couldn't answer it. So he asked me even an easier question. I couldn't answer that. He asked me an even easier question. I couldn't answer that. As everybody was leaving Rabbi Aaron Leib's with their sweeties, he called me over, and he said, all these boys were asked a question, and they answered the question, and they got one sweetie. You were asked 3 questions, and so you get 3 sweeties. Why? Because in Yiddishkeit, we don't get paid for results. We get paid for effort. You tried to answer 3 questions, you get 3 sweeties. Because of those 3 sweeties, because of Rabbi Aaron Leib, that's what made him want to go and hear Rabbi Aaron Leib once again. All those years, that echoed down the years. I've written here, we live in a world of great darkness, and it seems that the lights have not come back on. Many years ago, my daughter, Kanai Nahar, now she's nearly 30, when she was at school, came home from school and she told us that a teacher had taught her a medrash that says in the days before Mashiach, Hashem will stretch a rope from one end of the world to the other, and everyone will have to grab hold of it, and Hashem is going to shake that rope very, very hard, and only those with very strong emunah and bitochen in Hashem will be able to hang on. She said to me, Daddy, we've got to find that rope. Where's the rope? Is it going to go through our Bira? We have to find the rope. Right now, Hashem is shaking that rope very hard, and it's going to get harder and harder. Will the rope go through our Bira? Yes. It'll go through our Bira. It'll go through Tel Aviv. It's going to go all over the world. And it went through Auschwitz, and it went through Bergen-Belsen. Many years ago, there was a poetry competition. And the poetry competition was to say the Lord's Prayer. Mizmor David, Hashem Roi. The Lord's Prayer, they call it, the non-Jews call it. Mizmor David. And there was this competition. And there was one fellow who was clearly better than anybody else. And there's tumultuous applause as it's announced that he's the winner, and he goes up and he collects the prize, and he goes back to his seat, and as he's going back to his seat, there's this little Jewish fellow who goes up to the stage and says to the MC, says, I wonder, would you mind, he said to the judges, would you mind, I would like to say Mizmor David. So everybody looks a little bit like, okay. So he gets up there, he starts Mizmor David. After a couple of words, everybody goes quiet. And after a couple of sentences, the whole audience is in tears. He gets to the end, he says, thank you very much. He walks out into the street. So this young guy who won the prize runs out after him and says, Rabbi, here you take the prize, you deserve it. He says, no, you won the prize and you won it, it's yours, you ran it fair and square. I don't want the prize. He said, it's okay, Rabbi, but I want to know one thing. When I said that the Lord is my shepherd, people cheered. And when you said it, they cried. What's the difference? He said, the difference is, I know the shepherd. When the person has been close to Hashem through suffering, he knows the shepherd. Our job is to hang on to that rope as hard as we can. Our job is to use Loshen Tov, is to find every opportunity to be mechazik those people who are around us, our nearest and our dearest, because sometimes that's the most difficult. I want to just finish with one more story about how each one of us, somebody is hanging on to, looking to us, and we can't let that person down. There's a story about the Bluzhever Rebbe, Zeichet Livracha. The Bluzhever Rebbe was in a place called the Janowska Road Camp, where they were building a road. The Nazis, Yamach Shemam, the Second World War, were building this road. And one night the Allies, the British came over and they bombed this road to smithereens. It was completely destroyed. The Germans were furious. So they herded all the Jews out into this freezing cold Polish night. And they said, okay, Jews, we're going to have a little game. This bomb crater, this huge bomb crater, you see this bomb crater, each one of you is going to we're going to line you up and you're going to jump across this crater. If you make it to the other side of the crater, you can go back to your bunk. But if you fall into the crater, you're going to be machine gunned to death. Okay, let's start. So one by one, they try and drop across this crater. Some make it. Many fell into the crater and they were rejoined with Hashem in that dark, cold Polish night. In this line was the Bluzhever Rebbe, a lion of emunah, of faith. And next to him was somebody who'd made friends with in the camp, a secular guy from Warsaw who'd lost his faith in Hashem completely. And this secular and this secular guy said, I'm not going to perform for these monsters. I'm not going to perform like a circus animal. When it's my turn to jump, I'm not going to jump. I'm going to stand on the edge of the crater. Let them shoot me. I'm not jumping. And the Bluzher Rebbe said, my son, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hashem has given us the most precious gift there is, the gift of life. But He's given it to us on a condition. And that condition is that we're not allowed to return it to Him 1 second earlier than He takes it from us. And with that, it became the Bluzher Rebbe's, it was now, his, where he had to jump. His turn had come in the line. So the Bluzher Rebbe backed up a few paces, and he takes this tremendous leap, and he leaps out, and as he leaps out, he stretches his arms out, and he sails across this crater, and he lands on the other side. 2 seconds later, this guy from Warsaw lands next to him. And they look at each other for a long time. And this young fellow said, how did you do that? You're old. You're sick. You're starving. How did you do that? So he said, as I jumped off the edge of the crater, I reached out my arms, and I suddenly saw in front of me my Zayda. And his Zayda behind him, and his Zayda behind him, and all of the Jews all the way stretching back to Sinai. And I reached out, and I grabbed onto my Zayda's coattails, and he pulled me across. That's how I got across. He said, but you, how did you get across? He said, Rebbe, I was hanging onto your coattails. Each one of us, somebody's hanging onto our coattails. Each one of us has the ability to pull somebody across. Each one of us has the obligation to beautify the way we speak, the way we behave. It's in our schus, it's in our merit, it's our job. If we're not going to do it, who's going to do it? We have tremendous examples, our great rabbis. But each one of us, someone's hanging on to our coattails. And it's our job, and it's our power, and it's our ability to, in our own way, to pull Klal Yisrael across the abyss of this churban, which has lasted for nearly 2,000 years, and bring Bezat Hashem very speedily the Guna Shlema. Amen.